Joining us now is Jonathan Larsen. He is the managing editor of TYT Investigates, and he has been following the story of the South Bend Police Department and Pete Buttigieg's role in firing the town's first African-American police chief. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
All right, so my first question is for people who haven't been following this story, maybe this is the first time they've heard of it. Can you summarize what happened in South Bend and why it's so problematic?
So you're talking about the tapes?
Yeah, exactly. So
Chief Boykins?
Exactly, yes.
Right, so 3 months into office, Pete Buttigieg first tried to get the black chief, the city's first black chief, Darrell Boykins, to resign. Boykins ultimately refused, and so Pete Buttigieg demoted him instead, saying that the reason was because Boykins was being investigated by the feds for what was characterized as an illegal wiretapping system of other police officers within the department.
Okay, so they're obviously running through several of the stories that you've posted. If people want a lot more information, even more than we'll get over here, they can of course go to tyt.com and see some of the write-ups that you've done. There are these persistent beliefs or concerns about a cover-up, that things are being hidden. We don't know for sure who exactly knows what and when they knew it. So talk to us a little bit about that. Where are these concerns about a cover-up being generated?
Well, there's a number of concerns on a number of issues. On the tapes, there were concerns that the real reasoning behind Buttigieg demoting Chief Boykins was not being shared. In fact, when Buttigieg appeared on a televised town hall, CNN town hall, and said that Boykins had been either the subject or the target of a criminal investigation, Boykins' lawyer told me that's a lie. And so there's always been a lot of questions about why exactly did Buttigieg decide he had to remove the city's first black police chief? And as you guys know, we found out based on legal documents that the city has actually had for years that describe in detail what's on the tapes. And according to those documents, police officers in South Bend were heard on the tapes discussing a plan to use Buttigieg's donors. This was before he became mayor, to use his donors to get him agree to get rid of Darrell Boykins.
So in those tapes, there were some statements made about a particular race and how that particular race will be back in charge as soon as Darrell Boykins is taken off the police force or fired. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think what was discovered in those tapes or what was said by white police officials in South Bend really helps to inform people as to why this story is such a big deal and why it's a big deal that Pete Buttigieg decided to try to fire Darrell Boykins.
So the Chief Boykins was discussed at one point by one of the officers who was using Ebonics to talk about the chief. That was one thing. And the passage you're referring to was one of the officers is quoted on the tapes as saying something, I don't remember the exact phrase, but it was along the lines of, it's gonna be a good time when all white people are in charge, meaning at the South Bend Police Department. And so we first reported that back in September, and there it confirms a lot of suspicions out there that had been floating around about why Buttigieg was apparently pressured to remove the chief and what the motives were of Boykins's enemies within the department. And I should add that there's no indication, at least in these documents or that I've heard, that there was substantive complaints about Boykins in terms of being a bad administrator, in terms of crime going up under his watch. I've never heard any indication of that. It all seems to be pegged to this one incident where Buttigieg has given, let's say, varying accounts over the years of why he decided to demote Boykins.
So that's where I'd like to jump back into this, because I think it's pretty clear that there is an injustice here, both over the past few years and also if at some point perhaps we can get into the racial criminal justice context there, going back some time. But the question for Buttigieg is, how wrapped up in this is he? It's one thing for people to be talking about him, it's another for him to be directly involved in it. And so as you've been breaking these stories over the past year, how, I guess, responsive and transparent has Pete Buttigieg and his campaign been in about what they knew and when they knew it?
The one thing I'll say off the top is that they have yet to dispute, if I recall correctly, any substantive material fact that we've reported. None of the documents that we've uncovered and published have had their authenticity disputed, and the president of the Common Council, who is a Buttigieg ally, actually said that TYT's reporting was, I think he said, the most insightful or informative that anyone's done in the past 7 years. So. The authenticity of what we've been reported really hasn't been substantially challenged. Now, I will say that one Buttigieg spokesperson at times referred to as rumors, referred to them as unsubstantiated, which sort of tiptoes up to the line of being a denial, but doesn't actually constitute a denial. So you can make of that what you will. In terms of providing material responses to our questions, we've gotten very specific, very detailed responses to some of our questions, and we've gotten no responses to other questions, and we've gotten something in the middle where it's sort of a response, but it doesn't really address what we've asked. So they are, mostly, I should say, polite and responsive, but I will also add that I've been asking for an interview with Pete Buttigieg since back in April. And as far as I'm aware, I'm the one person in the country to whom they have not given a yes or a no.
I mean, they were even considering Dave Rubin for an interview at one point. Okay. So I think it's super shady that they're denying you an interview. But I mean, if they do agree to an interview, I think that Buttigieg would be asked some pretty difficult questions. An example of a difficult question he was asked was during a CNN town hall when he was asked about the firing of Boykins. And he said specifically that Boykins was the subject of a federal investigation. And that's the reason why Buttigieg did not want to release the tapes featuring the white South Bend police officials talking about Boykins and all of that. So can you talk a little bit about whether or not there really was some sort of federal investigation into Boykins, and is that a credible argument in refusing to release the tapes?
There absolutely was a federal investigation. The investigation, however, was not necessarily of Boykins. It was more of what is going on here. So what happened was in January of 2011, at least one police officer from South Bend went to the feds and said, we've been wiretapped, we've been taped, and the chief did it specifically to us in order to, tank our careers or what have you. And as it turned out, the US attorney for the Northern District of Indiana issued a letter in May, I believe, of 2011 that said that the recordings began accidentally. They were not begun under Chief Boykins, and no charges were filed. And in fact, the lawyers for both the chief and the woman who was actually fired from the department, they both indicated to me that their clients were treated almost as helpers by the feds, the FBI, who were doing the investigation. They were asked to, hey, can you take another listen to these tapes, or things along those lines. This is the way witnesses may be treated, but not the way someone who is an active suspect in an investigation. So essentially, the US attorney, the feds, they refuted the narrative that the other cops came to them with.
So it's just fascinating, right? Because you have Pete Buttigieg getting elected, and one of the first things he does is he tries to fire Daryl Boykins. Once Boykins refuses to leave, he gets demoted right away. Again, this is South Bend's first African-American police chief. And then when it came to Karen DePape, who was part of the department, she's the one who discovered the questionable tapes to begin with, featuring the South Bend police, saying all these terrible racist things. She ends up getting fired right away. She files a wrongful termination suit against the city as a result. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, she basically said there was no cause for letting her go, and what her case turned up, what her case ended up doing was she was suing not just the city, but Buttigieg individually. And so what happened was Buttigieg's and the South Bend lawyers, both the city attorneys, but also outside counsel that Buttigieg brought in, they asked DePape very specific questions. What did you hear on the tapes? And she answered them. And we got access to some of those documents, which is how we know now. But the other thing that those documents tell us is that Buttigieg, or at least his lawyers, have had those answers as well for years now. And it also undercuts Buttigieg's reasoning that he didn't think he could ask what was on the tapes. But his lawyers explicitly did, and they did not get in trouble for it, and they were acting on his behalf. Lots of people, it turns out, not only knew what was on the tapes, but were asking questions about it. Pete Buttigieg is the only one who sort of seems to have put up what the campaign sort of described as a firewall between him and the tapes, despite the fact that people acting on his behalf were asking, they were getting answers, they had answers, and there's no legal rationale that I've been told about talking to lawyers about this that suggests that you can ask your lawyers to do things for you to ask questions that you're not allowed to ask. They are your proxies.
So I have one last question for you. If you could just, I'm curious about your, I guess how you view this, if you could answer. So you've been doing these stories. There are a lot of concerns from reporters like you, but also people in the community for some time. And yet, despite the fact that the media has really latched on to Buttigieg this year, they delved into his background. What languages does he know? What instruments does he play? And all of that. When it comes to this story, which seems objectively the most substantive thing to come out of his time as mayor of South Bend, but also, let's say just pragmatically as a member of the media, the juiciest as well, there's been a pretty extreme lack of interest in this story from the national media. What do you think might be generating that?
I wish I knew. I'm not really clear. It's a complicated case. I will certainly say that. So it can be tough to really sink your teeth into, wrap your head around whatever metaphor you want to use. But there are also other simpler cases. There's the case of Jihad Vasquez, who was found hanged, 16-year-old black boy, found hanged in 2011. His mother in 2012 asked Pete Buttigieg, will you help me open this case because I think it was a murder? He said, call my office. She did. They never got back to her, never put her through. And she was accompanied by a representative of the local NAACP. There was another incident in 2013. A white chief was accused of failing to back up a black lieutenant. Buttigieg saw a secret Indiana State Police report on that incident and basically suggested that it exonerated his chief. I got a copy of an excerpt of that report, which did not exonerate him at all, and in fact made clear why the Board of Public Safety, for instance, resigned and also called Buttigieg a liar as a result of that story. And so those are simpler stories. If people are interested in asking Pete Buttigieg, can you please sit down and walk us through exactly what you said and why, and give us a chance to respond, to follow up and say, well, wait a minute, what about XYZ? That used to be a typical, thing to happen for newcomer candidates in presidential campaigns.
Well, we'll see. He's one of the higher tier candidates now. Perhaps that will generate some of these questions that have been lacking so far. Jonathan, you've done a great job throughout the year on this story, and we really appreciate you joining us today to go over some of the details.
Thanks very much to both of you.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.